Ladies and gentlemen, the second day of the 5th European Forum for New Ideas. Time to launch the day. Good morning. I would like to welcome you all cordially. My name is Dorota Warakomska. How are you today? Somewhat tired after yesterday's night's talk? Are you tempted by the beautiful weather outside? I think that this weather is going to be conducive to our talks, is going to raise the temperature of our discussions within the pavilion of new ideas. As you know, it is already the 5th time we are meeting here in the pavilion of new ideas to discuss, to argue and debate, but also to inspire one another. I would like to warmly welcome all the representatives of the world of business, of the world of politics, academia, non-governmental organizations and the media from Poland, Europe, and around the globe. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today is going to be very rich in events. We are going to hold 2 plenary sessions, 2 rounds of parallel panels with lunch, 2 round tables, lunch debate, and a meeting with the author. In the meantime, there is going to be the dialogue bay and also open meetings to the inhabitants of Sopot and tourists. In the evening, there is going to be networking evening, so a lot is going to happen. I need to ask you whether all of you downloaded the application that is going to be really useful today. Is it already in your mobile phones and tablets? I can't hear you. Okay, very well. This application is going to be really helpful. It is going to be useful when we will be voting. During the first session already, we will ask you to take the floor, to have your say by pressing the right button in the application. But you'll also be able to comment, to take your say. It is very important, therefore, for all of you to have the application on your mobile devices. The first plenary session is about to be launched, and it is going to be held in 2 languages, Polish and English. If you need interpretation, please equip yourselves with the headsets. The title of this session is End of Post-Cold War Illusions. Does Europe need a new order? The session is going to be chaired by the President of PZU SA, Andrzej Klesyk. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Half a year ago, when we thought about the topic to cover within today's EFNI, we thought about geopolitical changes. Back then, we noticed that something is changing, the world is changing in terms of geopolitics. I have never thought that this topic would become such an important one, especially after the events of Ukraine and what has recently been going on in Syria. But it appeared to be a pathetic decision, and today this session is going to cover the issues. The crisis in Ukraine proved that certain post-Cold War assumptions predicting that the values will be adopted by our neighbors, including Russia, well, they tend to be futile. The last several months of war in Ukraine show that, unfortunately, we don't seem to have common values. So we are going to consider 2 questions. The first part of those will pertain to the institutional order. So we'll be thinking whether we need any new institutions, new tools, new solutions, and whether the West, broadly understood, should change its approach to values. Thinking about the potential benefits it could bring, another issue that we'll consider is that of economic issues. To what an extent does economy of today constitute a tool of exerting pressure on our neighbors or other participants of the society and community internationally. In a moment I will switch to English and invite the panelists of today. Ladies and gentlemen, the first guest of mine, the first panelist, will be the man who is a role model in Russia, Fyodor Lukyanov.
Fyodor is the chief editor of Russia in Global Affairs. Здравствуйте.
The second panelist is Eugene Rumer.
Former member of National Security Council, but right now head of a program, Russian program in a think tank called Carnegie Endowment. So welcome. Third person is Olaf Osica. Head of Instytut Studiów Wschodnich, Ośrodek Studiów Wschodnich. And finally, we have a very distinguished guest from Bundestag, head of Foreign Affairs Commission, Robert Rӧttgen. Welcome. Gentlemen, so why don't we start with a very quick question, and maybe I will direct it to my neighbor from my right-hand side. Should we change or should Russia change? Yes or no?
Both.
Why?
Both of us. We have to adapt to new challenges we are not prepared for. We have to forge unity. We lack to a certain kind unity and determination. And of course, Russia fundamentally has to change to reintegrate in a peaceful European order.
Oh, terrific. Fyodor, should we change? Should Russia change? Or is Russia ready to change?
Everybody should change. I fully agree with Norbert. Is Russia ready to change? Russia is ready to change all the time. The problem is that Russia never knows how to change and what should be the final destination. And seriously, this is the biggest problem of the whole period after the Cold War, because Russia did not identify this new identity, this new model of development which would last in 21st century.
Okay, so why don't we then go to Eugene? Eugene, you represent the country that created this reset policy with Russia. So you believe that Russia would change, and that Russia didn't.
I don't believe at this point either Russia or the West can change. So we're in a situation where neither side is willing or able to change, and I think the division in Europe will persist for some time. That's the unfortunate reality. I think the previous model that emerged after the end of the Cold War of Europe whole, free, at peace with itself and its neighbors has to be put on hold until some future date. And we are where we are. It's not a new Cold War, but it's a new division in Europe for sure.
Okay. So now, finally, Olaf, the question to you. We are stuck between Russia and Western Europe.
No, I don't agree. I guess the US is changing, the EU is changing very much. The problem is that Russia is not changing, and Russia actually has nothing to offer in a positive sense to us. And this is the main reason why, although we would like to cooperate, although there is a number of common interests in our neighborhood, there is no, I would say, readiness on the side of Russia, actually, to decide. And here I agree with Lukyanov. I mean, the main problem with Russia is that Russia needs to answer a number of questions concerning its own future. I mean, Russia is in a position now that can not offer anything to its own citizens, let alone to the international community.
Well, hold on a second. It's a very strong statement. What would you say, Fyodor, about the statement that Russia has nothing to offer?
Again, I'm afraid Russia has too much to offer, and that's the problem. So we try to simultaneously develop all possible ideas in our country. Yes, I agree that unfortunately Russian domestic situation, both economically, socially and politically, has been exhausted, and the model 1990s was not nothing, it was just a destruction. 2000s was a period, very logical period of restoration of governability of the state, and Mr. Putin was pretty successful in that. But then we needed a new start, and this start never came, and the policy transformed into reaction to reactions to reactions, and this to adapt to ever-changing circumstances. I can only say that the European Union never helped us to overcome this problem.
Oh, it's a very strong statement again. But now I would ask you, ladies and gentlemen from the audience, to answer a very simple question using the application. The question is the following. The West shares the guilt for the tensions with Moscow because it has ignored Russians and Russian interest and point of view for years. So have we been kind of blind on Russian interests? So yes or no, we will come back to this question. Now, sir, question to you. Is it the question of Mr. Putin or is it a question of Russia? So are we talking about ego of one man, or is the problem of, let's say, institutional setup in Russia?
You wanted one-word answers. Yes. It is a question of both. It is clearly a question of Mr. Putin's leadership style and the agenda that he's articulated for the Russian people. But it's also a question of receptivity of the Russian people to Mr. Putin's agenda. I think to the record of the 1990s that Fyodor described for us or referred to briefly, and the unquestionable successes that Mr. Putin has had. We can say that this was because of the rising price of oil and other commodities early in the century, but Russia today is not the Russia of 1995. And I think that speaks to Mr. Putin's agenda, and we can't ignore that.
Okay. But if Mr. Putin, or President Putin, could be a problem, so what does it mean for the foreign policy of the European Union, also for Germany? It looks like, from Polish perspective, that Germany supported Mr. Putin pretty often, including, for example, Mr. Schroeder and Gazprom.
Yes, in previous times, we supported Russia. We were determined to organize close ties with Russia. We perceived and were absolutely sure the big majority did not consider Russia as a democracy. Mr. Schroeder said that Mr. Putin was and is a pure Democrat, but the majority of Germans didn't agree with him. But we were, a big majority was determined to have good relations with Russia, and I think we were right so. We couldn't imagine what later on Putin did, to leave the European order. We considered him to be an entrenched part of the European order. For that we launched partnerships of modernization. We extended G7 to G8. We had the NATO-Russia partnership and so on. We wanted to organize a partnership and entrenched relations with Russia because we knew and have always known how important Russia for European stability is. But it did not work because of a lack, this is my interpretation, a lack of modernization in Russia. Modernization in Russia has failed, and there is a lack of perspective how to modernize Russia, and this has forced in a way Putin, or has triggered Putin to play power play and to be a source of turmoil in Europe and beyond.
So this is exactly what Fyodor said, that the new start has never started, so has never came. Well, gentlemen, turn around for a second and look at the results. only 60% of people believe, well, not only, 60% of people believe that part of the blame stays with the West. It's kind of 50-50 split. So Olaf, why is it so that we are so divided?
I don't know. I disagree. I guess over the last 25 years, we've been doing a lot of things just to involve Russia, to reach out Russia. Started, I mean, let me just name, the Partnership for Modernization, which was very much the German idea. Then we open up NATO. I mean, there was a NATO-Russia Council. There was a number of initiatives which aim was to get closer to Russia, to talk to Russia, to address to Russia. I think the main problem with Russia is that we have an authoritarian regime which is fighting for survival. All what we see in Russia, not only in domestic politics but also in foreign policy, it's about regime protection. The post-Soviet model of social economic development of Russia has expired, and there is no new, I mean, there are some ideas because, in Russia there was a number of people, I mean, quite a good number of people who are very critical about Putin. They know what the country needs. But the problem is that we get stuck with the present leadership, and it's not only about the leadership, but also about the system that was created over the last 10 years by this leader. In this sense, I'm afraid there is no way we can impact Russia, be it in domestic politics or in foreign policy.
Fyodor, so now the question to you. If this is true what Olaf is saying, that there is no way that the West can impact or kind of ignite the changes in Russia, is there any hope there will be changes in Russia, since 80% of Russian society supports the current system?
For sure it will be change in Russia. This change will not have anything to do with what European Union wants or doesn't want. Because I think one of the problems in our relationships is the beginning was that the European Union, after the Cold War, the West at large, and the European Union in particular, have been consumed so much by feeling of self-admiration and deep conviction that everything we do is the best and the most and the rightest which exists. And we know, the Europeans know what Russia needs and what Russia should do. And yes, we offer a lot of ideas, and if those ideas don't work, it's because of Russian problems. I'm afraid it might be a different view on this. Maybe ideas were wrong. So I think that a Russian change is inevitable in the future, which we cannot predict, but it might happen much sooner than we expect. But the idea that anybody outside Russia can define what kind of change should happen is absolutely impossible and senseless, because Russia demonstrated many times that attempts to adopt system which doesn't fit Russian specificity will fail.
Well, it's a very strong statement. So, again, if Russia is such a strong country, or if Russia believes that it's such a strong country, let's talk about the in relative terms. And then I will ask Eugene. But before asking Eugene, the question to you, ladies and gentlemen. Answer yes or no. From the economic and political perspective, Russia is a declining power, and its importance for EU or for the world is overestimated. Because I have heard what Fyodor said, that this is exactly, we are a very strong country and so on and so on. But Eugene, what do you think? From your point of view, sitting in Washington, is Russia relevant?
Well, every day we're finding out that Russia is very relevant.
Including yesterday's Syria situation.
Including the events in Syria, unfortunately. Look, I think we are rethinking nowadays a lot of the going-in assumptions that we made at the end of the Cold War about the future arrangement in Europe, about the New World Order. Some of you may remember the phrase from those days. Countries don't just disappear or change completely simply because one government goes out and another one comes in. There is something to be said for historical continuity. There's something to be said for political agendas of leaders. So Russia may not be the Soviet Union of the 1980s, but it is still a major power in Eurasia, where everything that really is essential to the world is happening. I'm talking about the larger continent of Eurasia. And it has the ability to stand in the way of the West when the West wants to pursue some policy unilaterally and get the West to notice it and pay attention. I think that's exactly what we're seeing in Syria, and that's exactly what we saw, unfortunately, in Ukraine as well.
Okay, now the question to you, Norbert. You, as a country, you are friends with the US and you have very good relationship with Russia versus others. Is there any common ground that exists between the West and Russia? Is there anything that we can build on?
We think yes. We think that
so what is
every country, but we have different perceptions of that. Russia has decided to leave the fundamental principles of common order. And this, of course, seems to make it nearly impossible to find common ground, to forge alliances, to respond commonly to changes. Because the fundamentals of the Helsinki process, the Paris Charter, to respect the integrity of countries, the integrity and sovereignty of neighboring countries are absolutely fundamental in an ever more globalized world. And leaving this does not make Russia stronger. There is an internal perception of getting stronger, but in fact, Russia is getting more and more dependent, because Russia, of course, is also dependent on ties and relations to others. So is there a common ground? We can't really find them. There is. Energy would be a common ground, but energy is applied by Russia as a political weapon. We could, of course, intensify trade. We could fight for political processes, not to speak of peace in the Middle East, but again there, Russia is applying and deploying its power policy and its influences. So I would say there is, on a factual basis, there would be common ground, but Russia has decided in a way to go an isolated way and not to join common approaches. We only can hope that there will come into existence political and economic pressure which will lead Russia to reintegrate into common and joint approaches again.
Well, again, we are assuming that the values that we based our system on are acceptable to Russia. Now, Olaf, maybe we should come up with an interesting institutional solutions. Forget about values, forget about energy. Let's sign a deal. What would you say?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that we can forget about values. I guess values and interests, they go hand in hand, and that's very, I would say, tricky way of solving problems. Just let's push aside just values. I guess it's very much about values, especially when you take into consideration the present situation in Russia. On the other hand, I mean, we've been hearing the story about some, sort of a strategic deal between Russia and the West. My question is, what should be the nature of this deal? I mean, let's take Ukraine. Well, Russia expects us to exactly strike this kind of a deal. We say, well, but Ukraine's a different country now. I mean, Ukraine is these days very anti-Russian, and it's not because of us, it's because of your military invasion there. I mean, we have no control over Ukraine the way you had it in the past under Yanukovych watch. So in this sense, I do see this, this is not only Russia, this is the old Soviet temptation. Let's have this big picture, let's strike strategic deals. On the other hand, the world today is very much different, and we not only don't want to strike these deals because of our values, but there is no way that we can strike them because Russia is only a partner to solve many problems. Also in the Middle East, a partner, not the partner.
Yeah, it's also a very interesting perspective, and I will ask Eugene on a question about the new kind of order in the world. Because, as Olaf said, Russia is one of the puzzles, of pieces of the puzzles. We have China, we have Middle East, we have Turkey, we have Africa. Do you believe that there is some kind of common ground for everyone to create a new order based on values, based on economic principles, based on beliefs?
I don't believe it is possible right now because the world, I think, is heading into a protracted period of massive disorder. We're seeing the reordering, or the disordering rather, of the Middle East. We're seeing a change in Asia with the rise of China and a new and as yet untested relationship between Russia and China. We're seeing possibly a very different environment emerging after the coalition withdrawal from Afghanistan and in Central and South Asia. So I think we're heading into a protracted period of global instability. We do have a common interest in avoiding it, but we don't have the capabilities to really merge, to bring together, to prevent this from happening. I think Russia, if you look in the kind of very cold, hard, realpolitik way, will realize pretty soon that the 25 years or so since the end of the Cold War were really a very favorable time for Russia because it had no threat in the West and a very benign arrangement with NATO, with the transatlantic community that helped it project stability and security around the periphery of the Russian Federation. Okay. That's gone.
That's interesting. Why don't we ask the audience also one more question? The previous question about the decline or not decline of Russia, almost 65% of you believe that Russia is in declining mode. But as some people say, a hurt bear is even more dangerous than a very healthy one. Let me put a question to you. Sanctions on Russia, I would say, / other countries like Iran or Syria, should be maintained regardless of the economic costs. Yes or no? So we are coming back to the question, is the tool that we use, economic sanction, to start or trying to influence other countries, effective or not? Fyodor, what are the sanctions doing to Russia internally?
First of all, if I may, I would like to add to the previous question about deal. I agree with Olaf and others. I don't believe the deal is available. It's very simplistic understanding. Unfortunately, in Russia, we have a lot of people who would like to see a world much easier, much simpler than it is.
But what would need to happen for the deal to be available? Because this is a scary thought that there is no deal.
I don't think there is any change in the near future which can generate a deal. Because, as Eugene mentioned, the world is in the process of total disorder and turbulence. And that brings me to another part of this discussion about values. I'm sorry to say, but sometimes when I hear about values, I remember the discourse of the late Soviet Union when the old mantras were repeated all the time. First, no one knew what they mean. And then everybody ceased to believe in that, what they said. So what kind of values we mean? The world is changing profoundly towards multiculturality, plurality. And yes, there are certain perceptions which are seen in the West as basics. But even in the West, we see growing discontent around those values. I think we need to stop talking about values as a grounding fundamentals for international development. Inside Europe, not the whole Europe, but part of Europe which is culturally homogeneous, yes, maybe, but not else.
So to be precise, to take your point to extreme, we should say that, for example, the value of freedom, it's not the value that we should base on our discussion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you think
absolutely
that
yes or absolutely not?
Absolutely yes. But do you think that freedom is understood in China, in Iran, in Brazil, in Russia, and in Belgium in the same way? And even in the United States and in Europe? It's a different perception of freedom.
Okay.
What would you say to the principle of respect of territorial and state sovereignty and integrity?
This principle is absolutely crucial, and I would love all countries to respect it. But those principles are always based on balance of interest and balance of powers, historically. If it doesn't exist, it's very difficult to expect this principle to be respected.
It looks like I already lost power over this panel, but that's great. No, it's outstanding, but that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. So, are there any values? Because we believe that this is the values we have in the West are the prevailing values and they should win sooner or later. What about if Chinese values win?
Yes, this depends on our willingness and readiness to forge a political alliance as the West, to forge and establish the West as a foreign and security policy actor. If we think we can afford to be not united in the globalized world, then others will prevail, and China is rising, not because of its value attraction, but because of its power. And so the West is asked and called for unity in order to pursue its values, and the values are the basis of our politics. But I agree with Fyodor that we are not at the stage that we can have an agreement on global values which could be a basis for a global order. But nobody has this illusion. What we have now failed to do is even that we have given up principles of coexistence which we had achieved in the circumstances of the Cold War. And this is the backlash we have faced now, and we are imposed by Russian politics.
Yeah, because the Cold War was based on the balance of powers. Okay. That's simple.
But that's a very good question to Olaf. Because, look, these two guys have different assumptions. So, what assumptions are correct in terms of setting the new order?
Well, I guess, putting aside values, I guess values are very important. We sometimes underestimate its importance here in Europe, but it only takes to fly from Warsaw or Berlin just to New Delhi or Beijing just to realize how much just, our values are actually just, part of our identity. But I do agree with Mr. Rőttgen. I guess, it's not so much about values, it's about principles of international order, international law. In this sense, I know there is this, the narrative in Russia that, Ukraine is basically about Kosovo. Well, it's very much not. Kosovo was a very much different situation, and no one actually just annexed Kosovo. Here in Ukraine, when it comes to Crimea, it's very much different. In this sense, I mean, we are talking about, well, as the, title of our discussion says, we're talking about basic principles of international order. If we do not agree of, things like territorial integrity, then actually just, everything is possible. In this sense, the problem with Russia, and it's sort of striking me that we are discussing only Russia. I mean, again, Russia is only a problem with our, international order. But the problem with Russia is that, my sense is that what we see in Russian politics is a sort of an Asian turn. I mean, Russia is becoming less and less of a European power, and is becoming more and more of an Asian power. In this sense, your question about China is very important, but I'm afraid, although I'm not Russian, so why should I care? Actually, this sort of a Sino-Russian alliance is not in Russian interest in long term, exactly because the values and the principles which Russia does not respect in Ukraine, but at the very moment when, the closer it gets to China, it will recall those values as a sort of protection about China.
Okay. For your information, because gentlemen, you were sitting behind, kind of facing the audience, there was the result of our recent question. More than 65% of people said that the sanctions are very, economic sanctions are very useful tool and should not be lifted. So vast majority of people in the audience believe that the sanctions are working. Now, Eugene, your country has been kind of the first, probably, in the world to start using economic pressure and using economic tools to influence the world. So, when you think about it, Google or Apple, the value of one of those two companies is larger than the total capitalization of Moscow Stock Exchange. So how come the economic tool is not working?
I would disagree with the notion that the United States was the first country to resort to...
Obviously, even Egypt in the old times and Roman Empire, but...
Right, there is England during the time of Napoleonic Wars and so on. Well, the answer is very simple. It is, in a sense, the least costly tool available in our foreign policy toolkit. It's easy to slap Iran with sanctions because we're not prepared to go to war with Iran. It's a tempting tool for our political leaders, and it's the one that really does not inflict a whole lot of pain immediately on the population. I think there's your answer. I think we're coming to realization slowly that economic sanctions are not cost-free. It is much more appreciated here in Europe, where the volume of trade with Russia, for example, exceeds $400 billion a year. But in the United States, too, I think as we're looking at the possibility, the prospect of other countries developing their own systems for payments, their own tools to avoid U.S.-imposed sanctions, I think we're going to see that there's going to be a price to pay for it.
Okay. And what do you think, Norbert? It's
yes, and this is really a change in European and also German policy. During the entire Cold War, we had dire relations, of course. We had the mutual threat of complete nuclear destruction of the world, but trade worked. There was the East-West trade in all the time of even the Cold War. And now, in the new political situation after the Cold War, we, for the first time within Europe, introduced this political tool, economic sanctions. I would say this is, as Eugene said, we are absolutely outspoken about the fact that we are not going to wage a war because and about Ukraine. So you have only very, very little political tools to express your policy of not acceptance of the violation of fundamental principles of international law, and applying economic sanctions which inflict an economic damage on your own country, and because of that gives expression to your willingness that you are very, very serious about not acceptance of this policy, and it is our only tool to express this. Otherwise, it would only be words.
So you are saying that let's make a statement by inflicting suffering on our own nation. That's a very interesting concept. Fyodor, hold on a sec, but I want you to change your hat a little bit. Try to imagine that you are not Russian for the time being, but knowing what you know, if you were to run something like National Security Council, if such a thing existed for Europe, what would you do to change Russia or not to change Russia? What would you do? Advise us.
That's very unfortunate situation to think for others. I think that, first of all, about sanctions, by the way, I think in 21st century we will see more and more of that, not only because it's substitute for war, but also because the whole global environment, which we believed in the end of 20th century and early 21st century to become universal, is now collapsing, is fragmented, and will be organized in completely different ways. Trade blocks, investment blocks, and so on. And sanctions, strangely enough, will be a tool of regulation of relationship between those blocks, those powers, and I'm afraid it's inevitable. And we will need to live with that for a very, very long time. As for National Security Council or Transnational Security Council for the European Union, I'm sorry, I'm still Russian, looking from Russia. Let's assume that I believe that Russia should become part of wider Europe. And I would work for that. But to work for that, I should be sure that wider Europe or the European Union is a successful project. Sorry to say, but now less and less conviction that is the case. And it will be the case in years and decades to come. So the power of attraction which the European Union used to have, or at least used to produce, is decreasing, and the National and Transnational Security Council of the European Union should first of all deal with domestic issues in order to increase this power.
Okay. For all of you listening to our panel, right now what I will do, I will ask the panelists to conclude with 1 or 2 sentences answering, kind of describing a potential new order, what the new orders should be based on. So I will ask all of my panelists, but then I will have 3 distinguished commentators, and then we'll open up for questions. So let's start with Olaf and then go forward. The new order for the world, what should be based on?
Well, first of all, I mean, this is new normal. This is new normal, and we've always been, wondering about some sort of a top-down, institutional order. I mean, this is not existing, will never exist. However, this does not mean that there are not, things which we should do. There are 2, very shortly. First thing is we have to sort out economic situation in the European Union. Secondly, we have to take seriously our commitments. I mean, one of the problems which we have with Euro, with Schengen, you name it, is that we are not serious about our commitments. If we improve our economy, if we have political leadership, and if we are serious about ourselves, I guess we can create at least inside of Europe a sort of a long mid-term stability. I wouldn't call it a new European order, but a stability and prosperity definitely is.
Okay. What would you say, Norbert?
Should be based on the fact and the insight in the fact of ever closer interdependencies, and that you have better to deal and to shape them than to pursue the illusion that you could prevail with a one-state solution approach.
Eugene?
I dare not speak about a whole global order. I'll just speak about what I would like to see in Europe and the transatlantic community. I think we have to be realistic. The present division will persist between Russia and Europe and the United States. I think there'll be some countries stuck in the middle. I think it's in the interest of everybody to let countries like Ukraine, Moldova, perhaps Georgia, perhaps Belarus, to find their own way. And I think in this context, I'm very much concerned about the possibility of countries like Sweden joining NATO. I understand it's an active debate. I think the idea of neutrality has to be preserved as a viable model in Europe for the foreseeable future. I'll stop at that.
Fyodor?
I'm afraid we cannot speak about European order anymore, because Europe, in a narrow sense, the European Union, is just part, maybe not the central one, of a much bigger framework which includes Eurasia, Far East and Middle East. And this is an area where all processes are interconnected, interdependent, and to try to solve European problems just in the framework of the European order connected to the European Union is simply impossible anymore.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll come back to our panelists during this Q&A session. Right now, I would like to invite the first commentator, but before I do so, I have to admit that I failed miserably, because one of the topics we were to discuss was energy and interdependence of different countries because of the energy, and energy being a weapon for geopolitical kind of war or interest. We have a huge privilege to have a commissioner here with us in charge of energy. Could I invite to the stage Maroš Šefčovič? Maroš, you have a terrific ability to answer all the questions that we have not answered, but also to comment on energy and its importance for the European order. The floor is yours for 7 minutes, as I understand.
No, thank you very much at first for your kind invitation to this beautiful place, and also for the possibility to listen what was really fascinating debate. Usually you are invited to come to speak, but I think that very often it's also better to listen first and then to comment. So I'm really very obliged to the organizers that this time this was organized in this order. If you just allow me just a couple of comments on the previous discussion, and then also a few words on the interdependency, especially in the field of energy. I think I was listening very carefully to Mr. Lukyanov, and I really would like to assure him that after working for almost 10 years for the EU in different capacity, the feeling of self-admiration was the weakest one I felt. We clearly felt that we are going through very difficult transformation in the EU, which partially was also result of global changes, partially it was results of ever closer union we have in Europe. And we have seen that close they work, more interaction you would need, better mechanisms you have to build. And it's true, Europe was built in few steps. Sometimes we need the crisis to get us to the high level. I think that without banking crisis we probably wouldn't have the banking union and supervisor and a strong European Central Bank. And I believe that also lessons learned through the Greek crisis simply focus the minds of all our national leaders to manage their countries, their economies, their public finances better. And I believe that we would also learn from the current refugee crisis, where again we are at the beginning of tackling it. At the beginning we've been overwhelmed, but I'm sure that we'll find a common European response to this. But I think I would differ with him a little bit on the issue of the values, because we definitely do not want to lecture others. But we think that if we talk about basic issues like giving the people rights to elect their own leaders, having the possibility to go to free and fair elections, respect the rights of women, respect minorities, having the free media, and respect the borders, I think these are just the values upon which most of the global community members should be able to agree. It's not because it's good for these countries, because this is good for the people, for the citizens of this planet. And I think that we shouldn't look at the borders as a result of current situation on the power chessboard. Because treaties are there to be respected for creating global order. And I totally agree with several speakers that we are going through very difficult periods in the global terms. I think we are going through lots of instability in different parts of the world, and therefore I think those partners, those who, and definitely if we look at the P5 countries, we should be the first one to respect the global order, international law, borders, treaties, which some of them been negotiated many years ago. I think that would be a huge contribution of these global powers to the stability of the world. Concerning the interdependency, I think that between Europe and Russia, a lot of strong links have been built, culturally, economically. politically. Now we are going through very complex and difficult period, but nevertheless we see how interdependent we are, especially in the field of energy. Of course, we are talking a lot about the gas, and I spent with my Russian and Ukrainian partners many, many hours on finding the solution for the next winter, which I believe that we finally found, and I hope that it will be endorsed tomorrow. But it's not only about the gas, it's about the oil, it's about coal, it's about nuclear cooperation, and it's about what I would say is now coming more to the forefront. If Russia asks for respect, and I fully respect that, I think we have to do the same. We are asking for the respect of Russia of our rules within the European Union. Our companies, when they are in Russia, they respect the Russian laws. We just want the Russian companies, when they are doing the business in Europe, respecting our laws. That's, I think, only fair to ask. This is how we operate, and I'm very glad that the big companies of Russia with whom we are now in intense contact, that they are more and more vocal on doing business in Europe in accordance with the European rules. This is all we want, because we believe in the competition, we believe in diversification of energy supplies, we believe in liquid markets, we believe in the fact that more competition you have on the market, better price you get, better service you should deserve. And to be quite honest, over the last few years, being the biggest energy client of this planet, paying 400 billion euros per year for energy imports, it not always felt like this. And therefore, I think the idea behind the energy union is that we, of course, want to remove our internal barriers, we want to remove our internal obstacles, and we definitely want to use the potential of our market for better cooperation within Europe, but also with our key partners. So that's, I think, what we definitely would need to do. And if the Europe needs a new order, I think from the perspective of these global challenges, yes. I think we would need definitely more Europe in foreign and defense policy presence on these globes. I think our neighborhood and our global partners expect it from us. And we know that we made lots of progress, but we need to do more. We definitely need more cooperation in the field of energy. We need to be much more, I would say, vocal and public about the fact how we are helping to the third world countries, that we are major donor and a major provider of the assistance. And if it comes about that gloomy picture of European decline, here I also cannot agree, because when I travel, for example, in Asia, China, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, in these countries which are seen as the countries which are rising, which are growing, I think it's almost the rule. It's almost the rule that wherever we go, the Europe is or number one or number two trading partner. It's almost number one or number two key investor and the target of their investment when they are investing abroad. So simply, we just have to bear in mind that we are biggest economy on this planet. We are biggest economic partner for most of the countries on this globe. And I think we should simply work with this perception, and we also have to work with what I believe, despite the crisis we've been going through over the last year, that we are also a welcome partner for international relations, because we are predictable, we are reliable, we base our relationship on the rules, on the law. We want to negotiate. We want to find the solutions. We do not want to fight. We do not want to go to the useless conflict, because we believe in consensus, because this is the name of the game in the European Union. And I think that if we can get a little bit more of that spirit into the discussions between Russia and the European Union, both will benefit a lot. I think that in that small, tiny piece of the complex relationship on these trilateral gas talks, we have proven that it's possible. And I just hope that we can build on that small consensus we managed to build together, and to use it much wider in other fields of our cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a very positive statement from Maroš. Why don't you join us and wait for the questions? Now why don't I switch into Polish for a second? Dlatego, że mamy drugiego komentatora.
Because now we have a second commentator, someone who is a practitioner, someone who has been active in politics, so he understands what happens. So it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Bronisław Komorowski, former President of the Republic of Poland. Over to you. Just 7 minutes for you, unfortunately. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for creating this opportunity for me to speak about the most valid subjects for Poland, Europe and the world at large, because definitely the subject of Russia and Europe, Russia and the Western world is a subject that's always important, and it is always worthwhile considering in depth. During the Ukrainian crisis, when Ukraine was attacked by its Russian neighbor, when it was deprived of Crimea, when new fighting technique or hostility technique was launched through separatism in eastern Ukraine, the President of the United States said several sentences which I remembered very well, because at the time we were all asking, what does it mean? What happens in Ukraine? Does it mean that the Russian Empire will be restored? And the US President said that Russia has to be reconciled with the fact that it is no longer a global power, that it is no longer and will never again be even a regional power. And I've always wondered whether these declarations are not overstated, whether they do not really consider, take into account what happens in reality, but it's my conviction that we should start thinking about the future of the Western world's relation with Russia from this perspective, because every nation and every country has a right or even a duty to think in the categories of its own size, grandeur or significance. The problem is that this strength is defined differently, and it is also obtained by different methods. And I am convinced that our greatness of the Western world should be built on the concept of an open world based on freedom in terms of commerce, economy, politics, human rights as a person and citizen, but also solidarity and the conviction that it's through the integration of the Western world that we have the opportunity to be great together and to influence the global affairs together as well. The problem is that globally, many nations are thinking in different categories about their own greatness, in categories of their spheres of influence, decision-making, limiting someone else's sovereignty or freedom, or imposing their own will on them.
This is the space that we should consider. This is the difference that cannot be easily accounted for. Here in Poland, we understand the need for the feeling of grandeur on the part of the Russians. We understand it, but we would like it to be realized in such a way so as not to limit the right for freedom and sovereignty and dreams about their own big world on the part of the Russia's neighbors. To my mind, the greatness of Russia should be achieved by means of modernizing the country, economic-wise, and participating in the uniting processes of the whole Western world. Unfortunately, it is being achieved in the ways opposing to those of the West. Unfortunately, Russia is not ready to accept external stimuli. If this was the case, then we wouldn't stand a chance of changing Russia, as Russia is finding it hard to change itself, although it should. Let me just remind you about 3 cases that made Russia change under the impact of external influences after all. It was by Genghis Khan, and the Tatar invasion, but it was also the impact of Peter the Great Tsar, who launched the process of modernizing using the Russian-style methods, but consciously relying on the patterns set out by the Western world. But there is also the third example of the real impact of the external factors on the developments in Russia. And this part of Europe that Russia neighbors with. Remember that Vladimir Ilyich Lenin came to Europe in a Russian wagon that was also introducing some external patterns to Russia. Out of all these patterns, it is my dream that there is a fourth example to quote of the external impact upon Russia, to make Russia aware that its greatness can be built by means of the free market, introducing democracy into the country, and building relationship with the Western world, not necessarily following its patterns very precisely. The problem is that today Russia is under the leadership of the team of people who believe that it is the authoritarian system based on the oligarchy governing the economy to be the greatest pattern for Russia to follow. Well, this is not the case. I believe that this grandeur built-up on such basis would be only transitory. To quote the opinion of President Obama that Russia would never be a superpower again, well, I believe it won't be on a permanent basis if it doesn't modernize internally. Everybody who wishes Europe well should also wish well to the Russian-European cooperation. It should wish Russia courage to modernize itself. And to my mind, the greatest threat to the greatness of Russia is the current model of the governance in the country that we rightly are afraid of. Now, as regards the values, this is something that can bring us together or put us apart. Let me remind you the time when the Western world, consciously, Poland included, invested into building relationships with Russia. Back then they also invested in modernizing the country. I remember myself the talks I held with President Medvedev on the prospects of modernizing Russia with the use of the Polish experience, among others. The experience of moving from a totalitarian regime to freedom and democracy. It seemed obvious to transfer this experience in the field of local self-governance, building citizenship, in terms of supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, which appears to be the only antidote to all the effects of the system of oligarchs in power now. So this transfer of experience is still necessary, and I believe it is still possible, as is modernizing Russia in general. We also invested in good relationship with Russia, as can be exemplified by all the area of trans-border cooperation. Poland consciously pressed for tying the relationship with Russia so that Russia could be changed, and there is no other way. I believe that the illusion that we share, and that was included into the title of today's meeting, was dispelled much earlier, namely when it turned out that the post-communist system and the system that resulted afterwards has turned out to be a strategic break, because the problems remained. But it is worth bearing in mind that the end to this illusion came already in 2008. It was when we had two events emphasizing the essence of the returning change. First, it was the financial and economic crisis of the West, which undermined the attractiveness of the Western economic pattern. I believe that the process of declining of the attractiveness of the Western model or of undermining it has continued until today. And the other event that we should treat seriously was too weak a response of the Western world to the Caucasian War, because it is the Caucasus War that started the process of changes going into the wrong direction. It is not a coincidence that while the Western world stuck to its illusions in terms of the permanence of the change, the positive economic change in Russia was used to prepare aggressive political tools. In NATO, the investment on security were lowered consistently year to year. At the same time, the investments into security and defense were on the increase every year. So if somebody uses the economic success, greater budgetary opportunities, possibilities, if somebody uses this success to invest into the army, then it should draw attention. We should encourage Russia to its internal change on its own basis, or drawing on external patterns. Now, concluding on the post-Cold War illusions, I believe that the end to the illusion should be permanent, because leaving aside the Russian case, we need to observe that the problem of Russia should be mapped on a different phenomenon in which the model shaped after the Cold War, the domination of one superpower, is going into oblivion. In Poland, thinking about the United States as the only pole of the world was always accepted favorably. And this is due to our history, but today it is difficult not to notice that the Western world is losing some of its significance and power. There are different poles, if you could call them, or different centers of gravity radiating onto the world. It is not the US solely anymore, but there are a few centers of this kind. We need to notice this and draw conclusions. The world is changing, so should the West. If we want to be an attractive role model, if we want to play the role of a great power, understanding our greatness the way I defined it before, we need to change. And I believe that the desirable direction of the change is further integration of the Western world on the both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. In order to sustain positive impact on the developments, we always need to be open to changes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. If you could stay with us here, Mr. President, could we ask you to join us here at the stage?
Well, let's switch into English again. I wouldn't dare to try to summarize this debate, and therefore I decided that it's a terrific idea to invite someone else who can summarize. And who else than Vice President of Leviathan could summarize it better. So therefore, if I may ask Jacek Krawczyk to come here and do the work for me. Jacek, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Panie Prezydencie, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I will summarize, but I want to add some dimension to our debate, and allow me to do it in a very open language, if I may say so. I have heard today from our Russian colleague that EU is not a successful project, sort of statement like that. I would like to strongly oppose. And I think this kind of suggestion, I think, largely contributes to the narrative that is being created in the last 2-3 years that is also shaking and trying to reshape the current infrastructure, political infrastructure and societal infrastructure in Europe and in the world. And I think we have to clearly oppose it. If you look where people are living today into from various parts of the world, it's not Russia, it's EU. I think it says something about the principles and values as well. Now, I represent the European Economic and Social Committee, in addition to having a privilege to be in Leviathan from the very beginning. And ESC is an organized civil society consultative body of the European Union, because EU sees the role for civil society being in a very, very high agenda. I think that's another major difference. And let me make this short comment. It hasn't been mentioned today, the civil society aspect in Russia is going through very difficult times. And we as the ESC, and so did the Commission as well in the European Parliament, we've been calling upon the Russian authorities to stop the current practices, to stop oppression towards Russian civil society. Because without civil society, one cannot speak about democracy. Not at all. Going to the economic dimension, I think when we speak about EU as a failure, it's important to also remember that EU is the biggest trade partner for Russia. So I think that being the third largest partner for EU, Russia is a very important partner for us. And I think there is no businessman in Europe, in EU particularly, who would not wish Russia success, because it's a very important partner for all the EU businesses and all European businesses. Sanctions have shown, with some minor criticism, that European business is supporting our political leaders, with all the differences between ourselves among the member states. We were in a position as a European business to support and create together with the Commission and the Parliament and the Council a very uneasy decision about imposing the sanctions. But, as we say very often, there is no business at any cost. And here, I think, coming back to discussion about values, here the cost would be mainly also values, for which we all stand here in Europe. One of the very important projects which I see linked to this uncertainty being created lately, also by our Russian friends, is to speed up important negotiation on free trade agreements, trade and investment agreements in the world. I think this should be a very responsible response. Among those, TTIP being one of the leading ones, but also, of course, the whole issue of TPP. We are creating a new infrastructure for international trade and investments, and it's hard to overvalue if we, as EU, can co-create. That also goes for Poland. We, as a member state of the EU, have now a clear ability and possibility to participate and shape the final content of the agreement between the EU and the US, but also with the view for Japan and other major economies. This is a part of the response to the uncertainty which is being now created. Finally, Eastern Partnership. Poland is particularly involved in that, and it has to be emphasized, because I've come across quite a few times from my Russian friends saying, you do it against Russia. Not at all. It's been never against Russia. It's about promoting our values, but also promoting free trade and investment with the 5 states that have very strong, at least 4 of them, have had for a long time, pro-democratic, pro-freedom, independence aspirations. And we should continue that, with that view that DCFTAs, as a tool to improve trade and investment with these states, to also give incentive to promote democracy, free market, infrastructure development, institutional build-up. It should be a way for the EU to strengthen the democratic infrastructure that also will influence possibly some changes in Russia, hopefully, even though I heard today a lot of skepticism amongst the panel whether the changes are possible or not. I really do believe that if we keep consistent approach as a European Union, including the business, and here comes a bit of a problem because obviously sanctions come at the cost. And this cost is estimated just for agriculture for some 130,000 jobs being lost. It's estimated to up to 1% of the total labor force in the EU being exposed possibly if we continue much longer. Sanctions are not solution long term, but sanctions came with a reason. So politically driven process must take into the account also interests of the business. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jacek. Why don't you join the... Now, we have 12 minutes, 45 seconds for questions, plus 3 minutes that Jacek ate into your break. Now, the floor is yours. Please state your name and brief question. Whoever wants to go first. And I will ask my dear colleague Dorota to manage the floor because she is the best.
Bardzo proszę. Zapraszamy do mikrofonu.
Please direct the question to any of the panelists if you...
Well, my name is Jan Hartman, Jagiellonian University, Krakow. I'm a little bit surprised that the panelists focuses so much on Russia instead of America. I think that the future of political order, either the global or local European, depends much more on what is happening in America or with America than Russia. So my question is, what are your predictions about America's part in the global politics? Thank you.
Probably this question would go to Eugene.
It's a very difficult question, really, because the United States is going through its own domestic political change. You probably have noticed that the third most important politician in the United States has just resigned. I'm speaking about House Speaker Boehner. That's a sign of a profound change, not just in the Republican Party, but also in the larger domestic political scene. I think a lot of the establishment figures these days are feeling under fire. I think the fact that we have one Bush and one Clinton as so establishment candidates from the two political parties says something about the problems with our political system at this point. I don't mean to be critical and talk and dismiss in any way the underlying values, but I think the United States really is going through a very, very significant change that will take some time to settle. I think the United States is also, let's be honest, quite tired after a decade and a half of continuous war, which in a way has affected only a small portion of our population, but nonetheless has taken a very significant toll. And the future of our interventions overseas is very much in doubt at this point unless very significant American interests are involved. And I think you're seeing that really reflected in the way we have not approached the Syria crisis. Again, the United States is not playing the leadership role that some believe it should play, and others argue very forcefully it should not play at any cost. So I think this moment of indecision on the part of the United States is going to continue for some time. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I can see that there is, like during Tommy's times, a line to ask the question. We cannot hear.
Cristiano Pinzauti, członek zarządu Lewiatana. I hope not to eat the microphone. I don't need to say what I think because it has been expressed very clearly by President Komorowski and by Jacek Krawczyk. As to what the honorable commissioner said, I agree with everything, excluding, but only in degree, on one thing. You said that we don't want to lecture anybody. Now, there are two types of lecturers, those that want others to do what they think is good because it's good for them and want to force it, and those that want to lecture to people because they think that they have good ideas and only try to convince them. I think we should be of the second category because our objective success, political, social, and economical, creates a duty for us to tell others how they can succeed as well as we do. Now, my question is to our Russian friend, and I underline the word friend. What does he see which doesn't work in what has been so well summarized by our commentators? Thank you very much.
Fyodor.
I'm sorry, you mean what doesn't work in relationship between Russia and the European Union, or? Oh. So you encourage me to review the whole discussion. I'm afraid it's not possible. You know, it's not up to me to decide what was wrong, what was right. I think my feeling from this panel, as for many other discussions now in Europe and the United States about Russia, is the same. I hear a lot about why Russia is wrong and why Russia is failing and why Russia will regret it. Yes, maybe part of that or much of that is correct, but I would appreciate a little bit more of self-reflection. And if Vice President Šefčovič said that self-admiration is not at all the case in the European Union, that's great, fantastic. But looking from the outside, it's still there.
Pani Doroto.
I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Wilfried.
Again, we cannot hear you.
Yes, okay. I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies in Brussels. And Mr. Lukyanov, sorry to rub it in. Let me try to formulate the question differently. You made such an eloquent case against Western universalism. Now, let's assume that you are a citizen of Europe or the United States, and there's an activist from Hong Kong or from Myanmar or maybe from Moscow that comes to you and says, I share your values. You live in a free country, I don't. Help me. But what are you going to tell him? You're going to say, sorry guy, come from the wrong culture? Sorry, you speak the wrong language? You're a victim of CIA propaganda? Or you're going to say, as long as I walk and I breathe, I will help you?
No, I will say, sorry, I can't.
Very pragmatic approach. Any other questions? You have a very last chance. Second. Gone. Okay. Why don't we try to wrap this session? I will ask each panelist to give 1 minute of a comment, of summary of what they took away from this panel. But just to remind ourselves, we talked about 4 major things. Firstly, we talked about the values. We also talk about sources of power, both political and economical. Thirdly, we talk about potential incentives or impetuses to change. What can cause change? And finally, we talk about potential solutions. However, we did not come to a conclusion that potential solutions exist. For me, just to close this panel from my side, I just want to read to you one thing. Today, getting into at breakfast, I realized that I received an email from Harvard Business School. And this email has a very interesting title. It says, "Political polarization. Why can't we all just get along?" I think that this panel represents exactly the contradiction to this thing. Because we are sitting at the same stage, we are talking, we may differ, but as Brits say, it's good to talk. So, gentlemen, why don't I go from my left, my right, one sentence or two sentences summarizing the panel or the situation. Mariusz.
Thank you very much, and I was kind of hoping you will go from the other side, but starting, wrapping up and reflecting a little bit on what was said and how also the words are sometimes sensitive. I can tell you that from my experience dealing with the EU member states, always you achieve much better results if you go for positive engagement with the member states. Then you try to find a solution, very often optionalities, where you positively engage them to solve the problems before we end up in the European Court of Justice. And I think that some success of that approach is also demonstrated only a very tiny fraction of cases end up like that. And I think that here, coming back to our major topic, we need something similar. Positive engagement. I think I totally subscribe to the English proverb, let's talk. I think we need to talk. We see that if we talk and if we kind of manage for a second to put aside the negative predispositions to even talking to each other, then we might get somewhere. I think through the current situation we are suffering because of instability, we are suffering because of the feeling of strategic security boundaries being breached. Our businesses are suffering from the sanctions, and our people after Cold War are really in a situation when they are worried if the peace will prevail. So I think it's a huge task we have to explore all the possibilities for the positive engagement, for the looking for the solutions. And I think that that could be such a summary to reflect that we came to this debate from very divergent angles, but at the same time I think we concluded that the best thing is to talk and to look for the solution. Thank you.
Great, positive spirit. What about you, Norbert?
What did I take away? I would say firstly, again, that our conversation gave arguments to the persistence of turmoil and separation in the world. I think we will not see a quick end of our current situation. Secondly, I would say, including Russia pursuing this policy, I would say Russia is punching geopolitically above its economic weight. This will last, nevertheless, for some time, but it will not endure endlessly, and we have to prepare for a negative outcome within Russia. Secondly, I would say we are not going to lecture anybody in the world, but we simply can't underestimate our mass attraction of European values. We haven't talked about the refugee crisis, and this perhaps has already evolved, or in any case will evolve, as one of the biggest challenges for Europe, and not the last for European values. So and this is a daily proof and evidence of the values and its attractiveness, not of China, not of Russia, but of Western values people are seeking and want to live there. And thirdly, these values and its global attraction should impose an obligation that Europe and the West should not continue to punch geopolitically far below our attractiveness and our values and our possibilities to have an impact on how the world runs. We have to inject more to contribute for a little bit better world, and for that we have to further integrate. If there will not be treaty change which would give expression for institutional reform and more integration, then we have to build up core Europe. We have to forge states, European member states, which are like-minded and should go ahead to give an example what Europe can deliver in our current world.
Great. So lead through example. Olaf.
Well, very shortly, to answer your question, why can't we get along? I guess one of the reasons is that the politics has been hijacked by bad temperate emotions, and one of the problems, not the only one, between Europe and Russia is exactly about emotions. We live in different worlds, in different contexts. Second thing I'd like to say is that this is sort of the thing that I'm taking with me from this panel is we haven't mentioned the United States, and I guess this is another part of the problem we have in Europe, because the US is no longer a European power, as it used to portray itself many years ago. It's just a European partner. In this sense, I guess I agree with Mr. Røttgen. It's about the level of ambitions. I guess we are constantly moving between either the level which we cannot reach, or a feeling actually of fin de siècle, and actually this is the end. I guess we have to do our stuff right, and we're gonna succeed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Panie Prezydencie, króciutkie podsumowanie.
Mr. President, a short summary. Ladies and gentlemen, the illusions as to safe post-Cold World War world have been dispersed, but we still should be hopeful that in this new reality we can organize good relations with the outside world, and mainly, maybe even mainly with Russia, and we should work towards such future solutions. There is a saying that the monastery will last longer than the prior. And I think that a similar situation will happen in Russia. There will be an adjustment in Russian policy. There will be a new leadership, a new political team which will set directions for Russia. How, in what way, we don't know. But this change is inevitable. And we should have hopes related to it, that there will be a new direction for modernization, for democratization in Russia, and towards looking for forms of cooperation or even participation in some process to integrate the Western world. Russia, much as Poland or Ukraine, will always be split between going towards the West and towards Asia. It's Russia that has to decide whether they want to be more West-like or more East-like. We can help them without receding anything, giving away anything from our values, without admitting that someone expects that Russian interests has to be respected at the cost of the interest of other countries. The Western model can be attractive, but in my opinion, the time of the Western domination is over. So this single polarity of the world is over, but the attractiveness of the Western model is still there, and we should make it our strength by deepening the integration of the Western world, the entire Western world, through TTIP, for example, and by deepening European integration. The wealth of the Western world, which will still continue for long, is the best advertising towards any other country in the world.
10 years from now, I'm afraid a lot of discussions we have today will sound very naive and far from reality, because the world will be completely different, as some of our discussions in the past appear now. If I created the feeling during this discussion that I'm very enthusiastic about everything that happens in my country, that's wrong. It's not the case at all. My point is just one. Russia has its own domestic dynamics, development, which cannot be influenced from the outside seriously, and the internal balance between the feeling of great power and reality about what is possible and what is needed for development will be found sooner or later, but again without any outside influence, big influence. And I hope very much that those examples of outside influence which distinguished President Komorowski mentioned, from Tatar invasion to Lenin, will be never repeated.
Thank you very much. Eugene, summary?
Well, let me just say that if the idea of Europe whole, free, at peace with itself and its neighbors is somehow inadequate and insufficient, I strongly disagree, and I think the success of that idea really is visible here, when a group of Poles, an American, a Russian, and German sitting here talking about the fate of Europe. I think it's been a remarkable success for the past 25 years, and I'm really delighted to be here to be part of this conversation. Thank you for having me here. That's one. Two, I think we have to realize that that idea has reached its limit for its time. You know, Russia is not prepared to be part of this entity. And this takes me to my next point. In a sense, let's let Russia be Russia. Let's not try to tell Russia what to do domestically. I think Russia will come to the realization of what's good for it, and it's going to take some time, but we have to be prepared to be patient for it. Last, but not perhaps least, I want to repeat the point that I made earlier, that we need to be prepared to accept different ideas, different modes of political and geopolitical arrangements in Europe. That let's not corral the countries that have been stuck in between the two systems into joining one bloc or another. And that goes to the idea of neutrality. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks. Jacek. One sentence.
Yes, we are here because of our values, transatlantic values. So further integration of EU, further integration of EMU, further development of transatlantic dialogue and transatlantic alliance is what we have to do in order to address the changing environment. As simple as that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience. And I'm sorry that I have overrun, but I couldn't have stopped such a terrific panelist. Thank you very much and have terrific evening.
Bardzo dziękujemy. Wielkie brawa dla panelistów.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for panelists, but also for the chairman. And I would like to ask you to stay on your seats. The end of post-Cold War illusions. Does Europe need a new order? That was the title of the first plenary session. Very interesting. I thank you very much for the session and for the discussion. If you are leaving the pavilion, please press the buttons on your tablets at the ladies who are collecting your voices, gauging your opinions. This is an important poll for us because every year we want to improve the European Forum for New Ideas. And I've checked it myself. Pressing the right number in the application, assessing the event, that is the first plenary session, takes just half a second. So please be so kind as to do it and take part in the poll. Thank you very much, and I would like to invite you to take part in a family photo.